What is the cost of living in Santa Marta, Colombia? Hey, welcome to this video where the goal will be to answer that question for you based on my 2 months experience living in Santa Marta, Colombia. So for cost of living, we're going to cover rent. I will share with you what I paid for rent both of my months staying there and where was the location where I rented. I will also share with you the cost of food and then the cost of transportation in Santa Marta, Colombia. This is basically what we're going to cover in terms of cost of living. So let's get into it. The cost of living rent-wise in Colombia, for myself, I paid 600 Canadian dollars every month for rent in Santa Marta, Colombia. Now, this was me renting an apartment. This was actually a brand new apartment in a complex where they were still building out apartments. So they had only finished a few of the apartments, so there were only a few tenants there, and then they were still throughout the daytime finishing the other apartments. I do want to be clear that the apartments they were finishing, it was like just internal work that they had left to do. So it wasn't like an area that was very loud or anything. The construction was no problem at all. Now, I rented this place 600 Canadian a month. It was on the ground floor. It had air conditioning. There was a pool in the complex, and it was 2-bedroom place with a living room and kitchen area as well. So this was an amazing place. Also, it had actually a balcony as well. I should, mention that as well. Okay, so this was an incredible place for $600 Canadian a month. And if you were to rent something like this in, let's say, Canada, the United States, you would probably pay at least 3,000 Canadian, at least. Depending, of course, where the location is. In some locations in Canada or US, you would definitely pay more, and in some maybe a little bit less. But just to give you a comparison, okay? So in my rent there was 600 Canadian a month, just a quick repeat, 2-bedroom apartment. It had a kitchen area, it had a living room space, it had a balcony, it had air conditioning, there was a pool, and this was a brand new apartment, okay? Also, internet was included, utilities as well. I didn't have to pay that, so that was all included with the price. Now, with that said, you can definitely find places in Santa Marta for 600 to 800 Canadian a month. You can also find places for a little bit less. Keep in mind, if you're going to find a place for 400 to 500 Canadian, which there might be limited options for that, it's probably not going to be the nicest place. So you can obviously find something for that price if you want something by yourself, but most likely you can expect to pay anywhere between 600 to 800 Canadian for your rent in Santa Marta. Again, you can pay a little bit more too, depending on where you're going to be. Now, if you want the alternative option that is maybe a little bit cheaper than that, then I would suggest looking at finding a room in someone's house or apartment that you can rent. So usually for that, you might be able to find something anywhere between 300 to 400 Canadian, where you'll be paying that on a monthly basis, and then you'll be able to have your room. Maybe you have to share a washroom, and obviously you'll probably have to share the kitchen and living spaces. So this is something that can be more affordable if you don't want to spend 600 to 800 a month for your rent. That is Canadian again, okay? Now, I want to also say that the area that I was in, if you are at the airport in Santa Marta and you go towards the center of Santa Marta, there's an area that is kind of, much more central. There's much more going on in that area. It's about 30 minutes from the airport. I was in the area that was closer to the airport, about maybe 15 minutes from the airport. So just to give you an example, the area I was in, there was still hotels there, like hotels and resorts on the beach, but not that many. And there was a mall complex close to where I was, and then I was further in towards the mountains, kind of right, you could say I was kind of in the countryside, kind of, because whatever was around me was, houses kind of fenced, off in some like ranch land type stuff, people living there. And then if I went closer to the beach, I would kind of hit like a town area that, people living kind of in a town-like vibe. And then I would cross the highway and then go a little bit further, and then I would hit the beach. Now, that's kind of the area I was in. I know I'm not giving you the exact location, but to give you an example, if you're going to go from the airport, about 10 to 15 minute drive towards the center, then I will go deeper in towards the mountains. That's where I was. If you were to keep going and you would go for another 15 minutes, you would hit the center of Santa Marta, and there is much more busy, and rent-wise, you might be even paying a little bit more in that area, obviously depending on the type of place you're going to rent. Now, the very central area in Santa Marta, I only spent a couple times where I would go there. One time, for example, I rented an Airbnb for a weekend there. I definitely paid more for that, but obviously it was only for 2 to 3 days that I rented it. And then a couple times I would actually just go to the area, to the beach area there, where I was just, going to local restaurants, enjoying the beach, doing a little bit of work at cafes in that central area, but I wasn't living there. So when I have looked for places to rent in Santa Marta, since I've stayed those 2 months, the average place that I saw was anywhere between 6 to 1,000 Canadian. Again, depending on where you're gonna look for, depending on the area, so on and so forth. Definitely you can find a place for 6 to 800. That would be a place by yourself. It would likely have air conditioning, maybe even a pool, and so you can find a very nice place for that rate. As I already said, you can maybe find something for a little bit less as well. Just depends if you want maybe a place that's not as upscale. You're gonna sacrifice maybe a little bit if you're gonna pay 400 to 500 for a place by yourself. Again, Canadian that is. And if you want maybe to be in a nice place but pay less, then maybe renting a room out of someone's home for 300 to 400 Canadian a month could also be an option for you. Now that gives you a little bit of a better idea of what the rent is in Santa Marta, Colombia. Obviously, as I already said, and I really want to stress this, you can definitely find places that are more expensive, and also maybe you can find places for less. I just wanted to share what I paid and the type of place I had, and so you can get a better idea what you can expect if you're wanting to go there. Now, food-wise, in Santa Marta, if you're gonna cook at home, then getting food from the grocery stores or some local markets is obviously a great option. The area I was in, I typically only had a card with me. I didn't have a lot of cash with me in Santa Marta, so I typically will go to a grocery store called either Carula, or there was one. I was very close to a Carula in a mall. It was like a mall complex. I forget the name of this mall complex, but there was a Carula inside that mall complex area. And then there was another supermarket. I forget the name of the supermarket right now offhand, but that's typically where I went to. So either the Carula or that other supermarket. And you can find groceries super affordable. I would say if you're gonna cook at home all the time, 2 to 3 meals a day, you can definitely have your groceries between 200 to 300 Canadian. I mean, I know sometimes, for example, I've met Colombian families and they pay way less for their groceries. Like, just to give you an example, some Colombian families pay anywhere between 100 to 200 Canadian max for their groceries, and like they're feeding families and stuff. And so for myself, I was never able to do that, and I was only feeding myself, so I don't know if I eat a lot or what the deal is. But for myself, 200 to 300 Canadian, if you're going to cook by yourself, you can definitely do that. And obviously that is, you're eating real whole food. So I mean, I always eat a variety of fruits, a variety of vegetables, not like a lot of meat, but a decent, a little bit of meat with every meal type of thing. If you're going to go plant-based proteins, it's a lot cheaper than meat-based proteins, but I encourage you to eat a little bit of meat, whatever. But we're not going to get into nutrition for the sake of this video, but 200 to 300 Canadian is what groceries were for me there, and that was also including me going to local restaurants a little bit. I only went to local restaurants maybe once to twice a week type of thing. So I would go to a couple different spots, try out a couple different spots, super cheap, anywhere between 2 to 4, at max 5 Canadian dollars for quite a nice, large size, delicious meal. But for the most part, I didn't go to too many restaurants in Santa Marta. Only a few very local ones. And if you want the best deals and you want to go to restaurants, then obviously I encourage you to go to super local restaurants, because if you're going to go to restaurants that are in a mall area or in a kind of upscale more area, obviously you're going to pay a lot more in those restaurants, so keep that in mind. You can definitely have your groceries be between 200 to 300 Canadian a month. That is also considering being able to go to local restaurants where you're going to get the best deals possible. All right, we covered the rent, and I said 600 was for me my average both months. Then the food we covered, we said 200 to 300 Canadian. Even I'm just going to say 300 Canadian just to kind of hit the higher end. And then the last thing that I want to cover was transportation. The taxis in Santa Marta, at least in my experience, were not that expensive. I took a taxi from the airport that was from the airport to the apartment. The first time I didn't pay for it because actually the host told me he would cover the taxi. He told me, hey, when you get to the airport, the taxi driver will be there. Go look for this and this number for taxi. And obviously when you get to the airport, there's tons of taxis. So what I did was I just had to go find that taxi number, and then this guy already knew where he was supposed to take me. So the host had already arranged that, and I didn't know what he paid, because, he just took me to the apartment, so on and so forth. But when it came to go back to the airport, I had told that taxi driver, in 2 months' time, I'm going to need a trip, most likely, to go to the airport. So could you give me your number? And then this way, when I, need it, I'll send you a message. And so that's what I did. So this taxi driver, 2 months later, when I flew from Santa Marta to Bogota, he came to pick me up, and basically he charged me 20,000 Colombian peso for a 15 to 20 minute drive, which was from the apartment to go to the airport. Now, to give you an example, 20,000 Colombian peso is about 6 to 7 Canadian dollars, give or take between that range, okay? So it's super cheap in my, experience taking the taxi there, but that was only the one trip that I took that I paid for. So I don't know if sometimes you will pay more in certain areas or less. This was just my own experience with taking the taxis. I did take the buses a couple times when I went from where I was living to the more kind of central area in Santa Marta, where there's much more going on. There's, much more of an energy, many more people in this area, and the buses are super cheap. I believe I paid like maybe 1 to 2,000 peso, maybe like 1,000 peso. I would give them 1,000 peso, just to give you an example, Canadian wise, like 30 to 40 some cents Canadian. So 3,000 Colombian peso is about $1 Canadian, roughly, give or take, it fluctuates. So, 33 cents roughly, in between 30 to 40 cents for 1,000 peso. I think I paid 1,000 peso, if my memory serves me correctly. I paid 1,000 peso to take a bus from where I was at to go to that central area, and then 1,000 to come back. And so it was super cheap to take the buses. Obviously, if you want super cheap transportation to get around Santa Marta, then the buses are going to be your best option. Taxis are still quite cheap, so obviously they're going to be a little bit faster. So you can, give or take, whatever you want to do, whatever works best for you, you can pick transportation that suits your needs. Of course, if you, want to get around on, like, I don't know if you call them local taxis, but there's a lot of bikes in Santa Marta, people with bikes, and they'll be like just waiting at corners and they'll give you a ride, and I don't know what they charge you. I never did go that route. So if you trust that and you want to do that, I'm sure that's also quite cheap to jump on a bike with somebody and they're going to take you where you want to go. That's you got be a little bit more adventurous. To be honest, I'm sure you can trust them. But I just never did try that method. So with that being said, a couple different options you have for transport. You can even, of course, have your own car, your own bike, a motorbike that is, or kind of like a motorbike scooterish type thing. They have many of those in Santa Marta. Obviously, that's going to be a little bit more expensive. I never went that route. So you have now a better idea of what the cost of living is in Santa Marta. So let's bring it all together. If your rent is an average of 600 Canadian in Santa Marta, and your groceries are an average of 300, and your transportation is maybe $20 a month, then you would be under $1,000 cost of living in Santa Marta. Now, let's say that your rent is 600, and let's say with your groceries and everything combined with transportation and a little bit of extra spending, hygiene type stuff, you would be looking at about 1,000 Canadian per month in Santa Marta. You can easily live in Santa Marta for 1,000 Canadian, especially if your rent is going to be under 600. So if you have a place that you're renting, at 600, then you have $400 for your groceries, your transport, and a little bit of other things, as I said, that still gives you decent, like it's not like very restricted, let's put it that way. Okay? Because as I mentioned, there's many Colombian families living for like 100 to 200 Canadian a month on groceries, and they're feeding a family, and I'm not quite sure how they do that, to be honest, like to be real honest. But anyways, even if your rent is lower, if you have your rent at 400 or 500, you can even bring your cost of living to 800 in Santa Marta. So what I do want to say is that anywhere between 800 Canadian to 1,200 Canadian, that gives you a lot of space in Santa Marta in terms of, if you're going to pay a little more rent, or you're going to pay a little bit less rent, or you're going to spend a little bit more on other things, and or a little bit less, give or take. Anywhere between 800 to 1,200 Canadian, you can definitely do that quite comfortably in Santa Marta, especially 1,200. That is, of course, if your rent doesn't necessarily eat up too much of it. So the rent eats up the biggest chunk, and that's something that obviously I'm sure you will be aware of now, especially since I made this video for you. So you can figure that all in with what you have and what you want to do, and then go from there. Now, I appreciate you very much for tuning into this video. So very quickly, please give this video a thumbs up if you haven't already. Thumb up the video, because it would be super helpful so we can reach more people. And then also, if you have any thoughts or questions, please leave them in the comments for me below, and I'll respond as quickly as I do see them. Finally, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you have not already, so you do not miss future videos that I produce for you. I plan to make more videos for you based on my life experience related to travel and more, so subscribe if you haven't already, like I already said. And last thing, go to the description of this video below right now. I encourage you to go there because I have some unique offers there for you. Please check out every single unique offer that I have there for you and get access to all the ones that you need and or want. Keep in mind that the offers that I have there in the description of the video for you, whenever you get access to the first one, the very first link, that's going to be with me. me. But all the other links under there, I think it's 3 additional links. When you click them and you get access to those offers, I will be getting a percentage from those as well. So through all those ways, when you go to the description, you click the links and you join, then you will be supporting me as well. And I appreciate that so much. So thank you for your support. I appreciate you so much. Stay blessed. Let's go.